that. Simplicity, the art of simplicity, and a lot of times your effectiveness as a musician is not the notes that you add, but it's the notes that you take away and the notes that you don't play that give space. Because all that, what's going on right here, is actually what's creating the musical tension. It's not what I'm actually playing. It's the space that I leave in between. All right? So, earlier we talked about rhythmic patterns, and basically everything that we do is basically a pattern of some sort. And the reason why we call it a pattern is because it should have a repetitive component to it. If you're completely random in your playing, it's going to feel random. It's going to feel, where's this going? But if you'll take some 1 or 2 or 3 patterns within a song and repeat them, even if it's just a simple quarter note pattern, like first one's a little bit louder. Okay. You are good when there's nothing good in me. You are love on display for all to see. That's more pleasing to the ears than you are good, then there's nothing good in me. You are good. But see, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a little bit, if there's too much randomness into the mix, it can get lost, especially in the melody. Now, if it's a solo portion and that's where you can kind of spread your wings a little bit. And so I'm a little bit more random in my approach, and of course that's more of an advanced level thing, but that's not necessarily more or less effective than just being simple. In fact, I think simple can be more effective in those tender moments. And just learn in your playing and in your practice to really appreciate just the simplicity of how powerful just simple chords and simple rhythms can be. And then you can focus your energy on just making the even subtle things in the dynamics of what you're playing to create music on one note. Try this. Create music on one note. And just try to create an ebb and flow on one note, because if you can do that, that's where the magic happens in music. It's not in all the notes you play. It's not in the technicality of music. It's just what's the flow of the song, of the music. Okay, so I want to switch over to some keyboard concepts now. Let me turn that off. And let's go to, I've got a pad here. And this could be like kind of maybe a worship or a flow time where it might be just a pad holding. One of the things that you want to really think about with pads is that because pad is maybe not as complicated or as difficult to play as some of the piano parts, it's not very intricate because you're holding chords. Right? So it's more sustained kind of things. The important thing on a pad is to really establish some really good open voicings. And basically what an open voicing is taking your chord, like let's go to the key of C, since we'll just eliminate the black keys. We're in the key of C, and if we were to number these notes from C to C, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then in the scale it starts over because C comes back. Now, a C major chord would be consistent of a 1, a 3, and a 5 of the C scale. So with a chords are basically stacks. So every time you go up a third, that adds to the stack. So you've got a 1, 3, a 5. And if I were to add a major 7th, I could add a dominant 7, and that would be a 7th there. But for this purpose, we'll do major 7. We'll stay in that scale. So that's a C major 7 scale. Now, whereas a scale, C to C, would go back to 1, but when you're talking about chords, when you continue to stack a third up, you go up numbers. So a 9 would be up here, okay? 11, we break the scale and go to a C sharp. We go to a major third above that D, and that's a C major 11. Of course, all those notes are in there. It sounds kind of weird. And then we finally have a 13. And basically that is the most complete chord for C because if we go up one more third up, we get returned back to C. So you're not going to go higher than a 13. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13 is as stacked a chord can be before you come back down to 1. All right. So why did we go through all that? Well, you can do simple chords, and you can have a simple voicing. This would be this would be what I'd call a closed voicing. This is the C chord in the key of C. So how do we create? There's just something kind of basic about that. It's not bad. It's not wrong. It's just basic. And then I can go to F. You know, a lot of pad players, just like this, you know, more intermediate or novice level pad players are going to play their chords kind of like that, just in a very closed position. Well, you've heard the term fat chords. And sometimes people think that fat chords means spreading out your fingers and hitting a real fat, something real crazy, which sometimes it means that, but it doesn't have to be. Basically, what fat means is it does mean spread it out, fatten it. And that's where we come into open voicing. We're opening up the chord, spreading out some of those, you notice in here, and it's a basic stack, which means those notes are real close together, right? So it's jumbled, it's muddled all right in there in the center. Sometimes that's appropriate. Sometimes for like vocal harmonies, you want them kind of right there together to get that cohesiveness. But for pad, there is a better option. So let's go back to our original chord here. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Okay, so that sounds kind of nice. But let's try playing with the positions of the chords. So let's do this. Instead of hitting the C and the E here, let's take the left hand. And the first open voicing I'm going to show you is called the 1-5-1-3. Or, no, I'm sorry, 1-5-3-1. And so remember the 1 in the C chord is C, 3 is E, 5 is G. So what if we take the 1-5 in the left hand, which would be C, G, and then we take the 3 and then round it off with the 1. So the root notes, we're going to just kind of sandwich it. We got roots at the end, right? It's got kind of a nice depth to it. So this is the same chord, but now listen to the voicing change we have here. Right? If I were to take that up an octave, it would sound like this. Right? Closed. Open. Or if you want a real nice deep sound. Okay? Another open voicing would be 1-5-1-3. So that would sound like this. Right? And you notice we're not playing a lot of notes. This isn't hard. It's 2 notes in the left hand, 2 notes in the right hand. 2 notes in the left hand here. That was the 1-5-3-1. Just 4 notes. Very simple, but you see it gives it a really nice sound to it. 1-5-1-3. And then another one I'll show you is, this one kind of requires a little bit of stretching ability. It's the 1-3-5-1. Or you could make it simple and do that. Or 1-3-5-1. Right? So every time you spread out the notes, you get some depth there. Now that's just a triad. That's just the 1-3-5. What about the 7, the 9, the 11, and the 13? How do we? Whoa, that's crazy. Well, the C9, the 9 chord, like we said, that's a C9, which that sounds kind of jazzy. We wouldn't necessarily play it that way in a worship setting, but actually, the C9 or the 9 is added a lot of time in worship, and what it would sound like is, we don't have to, just because there are all these notes in the C9 chord, doesn't mean that we have to play them all. In fact, sometimes dropping one of those notes can have a really good effect. Let's drop the 7, which would be the B here. Okay, now that has a completely different sound than that. That's kind of got like a jazzy thing, but now all of a sudden we have some depth there. So now let's do 1-5-3-5-9. It's got a really nice sound to it. All right. The other important thing to really play with voicings is that as you change chords, like let's say we want to go to an F9, okay, and I want to go from an F to a G. Instead of going, I mean, it's not bad, but what we want to do is we want to create motion without too much movement. So let's see, what notes could I move to go to the G, and which ones could I stay the same? Well, I'm playing this 9 over here, which is also in G, so I could move these notes up a whole step. The fact that I kept this note the same really creates some tension and depth and really some nice movement instead of going, you know, when every note moves, sometimes it's just too much movement. You know, as you are flowing from one chord to the next, sometimes when you're just alternating two chords, but you're keeping and you're using a pivot note like this G that works in both chords, the more notes you can keep the same, you can get some real depth and some dynamics. That's a really great thing to play with. And what's interesting, like if I go to this A minor, the A minor 7 chord has a G in it as well. Wow. I dropped the 5 because I'm playing it in the left hand, so I'm just playing 1, 5, 1, 5, 7, right? And then, and what's interesting, as you look at my left hand, I'm just alternating these notes here. I kept the G open that whole time. So as you transition from one chord to the next, being able to like sustain one note through that whole passage. And it's not that hard because G is also an E minor too. So I could go to an E minor. I'm just holding that G. It's a really effective thing to incorporate into your practice. Like what note can I sustain throughout the whole thing? Usually the 5 of the, we're still in the key of C. That 5 will pretty much sit over any chord. Okay, so now what chord is that? It's 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. Now, and so that's where these stacks come into play because you've got more notes to choose from. So as you're moving from one note to the next, try to see, just, a lot of times it's not about figuring out the technicals. It's about just experimenting. Hold some notes, and if you'll know because it'll sound bad. But what you want to do is create some anchors right? So again, like I'm walking up. Again, we're back to that 5-1-5 principle, right? This is just a C5. There's no E right now. But I can, if I go up to D, I can play that and it works. And C over G, E. See how many notes are staying the same? Only some of them are going up. I'm going to do something crazy. I'm going to move up the bottom 3 notes, the thumb, this thumb, and that pinky, and I'm going to keep these 2 notes the same. Wow. That's kind of a cool sound. And then I'm going to just move that back down. That's cool. So, as you can see, a really good way to create some nice flowing undercurrent in some of those more ballad times, that's a really good thing.